I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. And today I just want to present an interview that I had. I wasn't the interviewer, but I was being interviewed by another YouTuber, Kevin Thompson, from Beyond the Fundamentals. And I've got to say, this is probably my favorite interview I've done. Why? Because it's very rare that I'm interviewed by someone who's outside of my wheelhouse, someone who isn't in the same field I'm in, talking about sexual issues and particularly like sexuality struggles, same-sex attraction, gender identity issues. So his content, his channel is usually about the Calvinism debate and other more soteriological issues. And so to actually be interviewed by someone who doesn't necessarily talk about the same stuff I talk about is a real joy and delight for me, because I got the opportunity to disseminate the things I teach my clients to a wider audience. And I just want to present this as a big thank you to him, and also because after that interview I gained a whole lot of new subscribers because of just how well received that interview was. But also I want to provide some commentary, so I don't want to just like, well, reshare the interview. So I got a little bit of commentary at the beginning and a couple other parts. It's already a long enough interview. If I didn't have a board meeting for the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice I had to be at, even though I was already late to it, I would have kept talking, and I know he wanted to keep talking too. So, how this whole thing start? Is one thing we didn't actually get into in the interview that much, just briefly, but it actually started because I was commenting on one of his videos in which he was talking about, basically transformation and sanctification and dealing with the carnal man. So it was his video on one of his live streams where he was doing a teaching on the natural man. So what was I even doing watching his video? So let me have a little bit of confession time. One of my pet topics, my pet subjects that I really like, is the whole Calvinism debate. The debate over soteriological issues, about the anthropology. I haven't been getting into it that much on my channel. I dropped some hints here and there about how important this topic is, because it might not seem to people to be very relevant to most of the things I talk about on my channel, such as sexuality. But this is actually a major factor in understanding our anthropology, and therefore understanding, well, the morality of same-sex attraction or homosexual behavior, and what can actually be done about it. Where you land on that, the issues of that Calvinism touches on, is pretty important. And I think it has a lot of consequences for where people end up in the different streams of viewpoints. And so I discovered his channel because I watched these other YouTubers like Leighton Flowers, and I like to watch the debates between him and, say, James White. And there was a debate that Jason Breida, whose channel I just had recently discovered, he had with James White, and Kevin Thompson was in attendance at the debate. And so a few of the non-Calvinists had a little bit of a roundtable discussion YouTube video that they did afterwards with Jason Breida, Leighton Flowers, I think Alana was in there, and Kevin Thompson. And so I was interested in what he had to say, so I checked out his channel, and I've just been devouring his content. He's been out there for a while, since I guess like 2008. He's been on YouTube doing a lot of teachings, not just on the Calvinism issue, but also on spiritual formation and transformation and sanctification issues. So he's a former pastor. Looks like he mostly does YouTube full-time now, or at least that's a major project of his. I'm not sure what else he does, but I've just, over the past few months, been devouring his content. So he really resonates with me, or his experience and where he's coming from resonates with me a lot, because I feel like an outsider even among evangelicals because well, one, I'm not Reformed. I don't like to call myself a Protestant even because I don't like to define myself by what I'm against. I'm a non-Catholic, but I usually prefer to call myself just a mere Christian. I have uh, charismatic and Pentecostal roots, and I still practice the gifts of tongues, and sometimes I get words of knowledge and prophetic words. So yeah, I still am a charismatic, but there's different streams that even charismatic and Pentecostal can be placed within. You can be an evangelical Protestant who's a charismatic, but you can also be a Catholic, or even I know some Orthodox who are charismatic and practice the gifts. So I'm real flexible about where I can be. Finding a church home that reflects all of my sentimentalities is difficult. So I resonate with a lot that he teaches and where he's coming from because I'm disillusioned with different aspects and trends that we see within evangelicalism. And watching his videos, I can tell that we also consume a lot of the same content, especially on YouTube. He's very familiar with the intellectual dark web. He mentions guys like Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger that I've seen on Rebel Wisdom. He talks about the 4 ways of knowing. I suspect that he got that from John Vervaeke. I also have a video on the 4 ways of knowing, and I connect it to the deconstruction explosion that we see in the church and our sexual identity crisis in the church. He also talks about polyvagal theory. I talk about polyvagal theory with my clients. I have a couple videos on it on my channel as well. And so I was really impressed with how he's doing this video, this live stream on the carnal man and on spiritual growth and transformation and sanctification. And he's seamlessly interweaving insights from neuroscience and psychology. And so I asked him this question in the comments section, and we had a little bit of a dialogue. It really sparked something within him. He had a really long response. So I'm really, I touched a nerve with him in a good way. So I commented, "Hi Kevin, I'm newer to your channel and I resonate with much of your approach. So this question is from a genuine curiosity. How do you handle biblicists?" If you're not familiar with that term, biblicist is those who take sola scriptura to the max, that you can only know anything if it's explicitly taught in Scripture. It's almost like they worship the Bible itself. So how do you handle biblicists who take issue with your incorporation of extra biblical concepts, like integral theory and polyvagal theory, etc., to explain Christian theology and spiritual formation? Do you see any of their concerns as valid? If so, do you utilize biblical justification, or do you find you are left to appeal to general revelation? I ask because I'm in a very similar boat as you. And interestingly, as he was doing this live stream, I was in the process of editing the video I recently did on concupiscence. And I had recently done the video on the sexual purity culture approach versus the sexual integration and maturation approach. So this was right up my alley at the time as I'm going into a teaching series, or a sort of a series of videos, not an official series, but a series of videos with the same tone, or addressing the topic of what are the underlying issues behind same-sex attraction and the church's approach to it, and how different streams of church traditions become our filter for how we approach this issue. And I really am concerned about the super fundamentalist, super conservative approach that I think goes too far in some ways in heaping on guilt and shame upon people. So this is where I was coming from at the time as I'm watching this video, so I offer this comment. He replies, "This is a great question. So I don't know that I would phrase it as to explain Christian theology and spiritual formation." Okay, fair enough. He goes on, "Christians are generally pretty comfortable with other health information that is not found in Scripture. We know to exercise, get plenty of sleep, and eat a healthy or healthful diet. Where is the biblical information for good cholesterol versus bad cholesterol? Where is the biblical information that informs us that sugars tend to enable the growth of cancer? What about our buddy who had an aneurysm, and I think he meant to say, and was 90 seconds away from death and had to have brain surgery on the limbic system, which left him acting angry all the time? What about the effects of trauma, which have a distinct pattern of predictable types of behavior and known physiological associations, such as a disconnect between the signal of the body and the memories in the brain? Question mark should be there. It's interesting he points that out, because then not long after that we have John MacArthur saying there's no such thing as PTSD. So yes, you do have these super fundamentalist types who will deny things like PTSD and the effect that it has on the brain. So unfortunately, we are seeing the extremes among certain streams of Christians, and it's sad. It's even from within my own camp, because I consider myself pretty conservative. And he goes on, and the TED Talk about what is learned from 80,000 brain scans. Very interesting. Intentional brain myelination possibilities and brain plasticity. I could literally go on and on and on for hours about all sorts of beneficial information we know about the body that comes from outside Scripture. Where do we draw the line about what we should and should not use because it's unholy or immoral? When you think about it this way, these people's objections are some of the dumbest things a person can ever say. It can also be helpful to walk them through the process of reductio ad absurdum, that is, reduce the issue to what they are arguing for and demonstrate how absurd that would be. Let's take away everything from physics to calculus to church pews and nurseries. This would mean that we toss out our cars and electricity, computers, internet, eyeglasses, thermometers, gas stoves, recipes from TikTok, polyester, protein bars, trail mix, wristwatches, tennis shoes, alarm systems, police dogs, fake plants, indoor plumbing, sports bras, ergonomic flip-flops, decaffeinated coffee, toilet paper, poodles, stress balls, hot air balloons, safety harnesses, nachos, 802.11 times Wi-Fi standards. I don't even know enough about Wi-Fi to know if I'm saying that right. Nuts and bolts, umbrellas, welding torches, rubber gloves, knee replacement surgery, tripods, chess, yogurt, ice, bungee cords, Alzheimer's diagnoses, lithium, soda, asbestos, wireless charging, speed limits, pants, autism diagnoses, EMDR, James Webb Space Telescope, polycarbonate, firearms, submarines, IQ tests, etc. I think you could have said etc. way earlier. As you can imagine, the list could go on and on, especially things like Alzheimer's diagnoses. That sort of stuff is pretty uncontroversial and well accepted. Do they realize how much theory and experimentation went into how far we've come in these areas? Growing, learning, developing, discovering, these are all wonderful things. And those who claim God created all this stuff ought to be on the leading edge of all these things. Polyvagal theory is precisely helpful to enable temperance, which is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It can help regulate emotions and prevent harmful impulsive behavior, all just by understanding how the body works and what systems are at play and being activated. I don't see how this is a bad thing, any worse than knowing to brush and floss your teeth or getting x-rays from the dentist. Polyvagal theory has helped me many times and has become second nature so that I can have calm conversation even when feeling personally attacked. What's the bad in this? People get this moral idea that since the Bible is true, then mistake that with its content being exhaustive, which it is not by a long shot. There is a bonded triad of 1. Necessary, 2. Sufficient, 3. Comprehensive. The Bible is necessary and sufficient, 2 Timothy 3:15-17, but it makes no claim of being comprehensive or exhaustive. If used properly, the Bible combined with experience, Romans 5:3-5, should provoke people to innovation. Side note here, the Bible is necessary and sufficient for the issues that 2 Timothy is talking about. So, and it's talking about everything we need to know for salvation, for her soteriology. So there's a lot of other things that we try to tack on and then say that we can't use this stuff. But I get into that in my reply to him. Also, I do have a video on what he's saying here. It's like, if used properly, the Bible combined with experience, meaning general revelation. So hence my video on why I use natural theology and natural law and general revelation, in particular when it comes to dealing with sexuality issues. And he goes on. To write the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon went out and observed everything under the sun at the time. His conclusion was to fear God and keep his commandments. Well, having good spousal relationships that stay together seems to fall in that domain. Christians know to do this, but they do not know how to do this. This is where observing everything under the sun can come in very handy. I think we should do the same thing. I'm counseling a young couple right now with their marriage. My ability to bring in Fowler's stages of faith and integral theory and rule omega is proving very helpful and maybe what this couple needs to help them see why they see things differently and how to mitigate them and stay married. Isn't that what Christians want? That's what I'm helping to bring to pass. I got divorced after 17 years. The information that I've learned since then would have helped me avoid divorce. Why are people against that? Life is a series of interactions. Christians make the mistake of offloading all the benefit of Christianity to the afterlife and forget that following the way of Christ, John 14:6, should result in positive, loving fruit here and now, John 13:35 and Matthew 7:20. I believe that following the way that is Christ can be applied to every domain of inquiry, and that doing so can help us all have better, more fruitful interactions that are in better alignment with our values as Christians. End quote. Amen to all that. Like, he's speaking my language here. So I reply, the problem is there's a huge double standard among conservative evangelicals, especially the Reformed, when it comes to counseling. I believe it's because of the dualistic Gnostic roots of Calvinism. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, you just have to do more of a deep dive into Calvinism. Sorry. They have no problem going to general revelation for medical issues, but since they associate psychological and relational issues as immaterial, hence spiritual, they believe you should go only to the Bible for those matters. Competent to counsel is how they view any pastor or counselor who just uses the Bible. I face this conflict particularly in my field as a therapist that helps people with unwanted same-sex attraction. The Reformed types don't have a category for the feelings, so they're left to label them as sin. But that elicits false guilt, shame, and fear in strugglers who are told they need to repent just for having feelings and urges. This scrupulosity then hinders their ability to take a mindful approach to the attractions, which would be the pathway to greater insight and healing. Sadly, I have to contend with big names in evangelicalism like Christopher Yuan, who calls any developmental model pure Freud. Anyway, I just released a video today about this topic, as I believe it all goes back to one's view of original sin and concupiscence. I'd welcome your feedback if you'd give it a watch. And so he replied, I'd like to have you come on this channel and discuss this if you're okay with that. Please shoot me an email. And I'm like, I'd be down with that. So I was not like dropping a question here so that I could try to get on his channel. That just was a happy consequence. I don't go and try to self-promote myself on people's channels and try to get them to interview me. So this was just a very pleasant surprise. So we emailed a little bit to try to set up a time. And kudos to you, Kevin, for taking a chance with me and doing an interview with me, not really knowing me very well. And so he actually kind of does a little bit of a disclaimer at the start of our interview because he looked me up and he watched a little bit of my content And I think he saw the interview I did with James, or the commentary I did on the debate between James White and Gregory Coles, and dealing with the Calvinist issue. I think that sparked his interest, and so he asked about that later in the interview. But he told me before we started the interview, he was like, I really didn't know anything about you and where you're coming from, but then I looked up your site and realized, oh, you're the real deal. But either way, once we started the interview, he wanted to make sure he put a disclaimer there because he really wasn't sure where I was going to go with things. And he kind of was apprehensive because he was worried I was going to come from this super traditional approach of just using moralizing when talking about homosexuality. And so it was a delight for me to present to him the approach that I take, that is not gay affirming and is not the accommodation approach of side B, but is also not the moralizing approach that we tend to see in side Y, the mortification stream, where you just have to repent. But I really got to show and highlight how the transformation approach, the rebuild column, side X, is the more sophisticated approach that really does approach things holistically and has the tools and insight to facilitate holistic change. So I'm supremely grateful for that opportunity. So there's the background. So let's take it away with the interview, and I'll just add some comments at a couple places.
All right, welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. Today we have Andrew Rodriguez with us. Welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. So I want to give a little explanation of what we're doing here. We chatted a little bit online, me and Andrew did, about mainly, I guess we both are Christians. We're both appealing to theology and psychology to try to talk to people about issues that we're all facing. And one of the struggles that we face is people who kind of don't think that psychology and theology should mix, something like that. I think that's what the tone of your first set of comments was.
Yeah.
And then when I looked at your channel, I see that you're like a practicing therapist, yeah, and a Christian. You work as a Christian counselor. So would you? And I'm going to do this real quick. I'm going to bring up a little graphic here just to show people. If you want to find Andrew's channel, you want to make sure that you go to Psycho Bible. That is the Psycho Bible, not Psycho Babble. That's what I get accused of all the time. It's Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. I thought this is one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. And I also have the URL down there for youtube.com/psychobible, and then integritychristiancounseling.care. So that's what Andrew's about. Would you mind taking just a minute and let us know about you? Tell us who you are, what motivates you, what drives you to do what you're doing.
Oh man. Well, like I said, thanks for having me on. Christian counselor. What motivates me is seeing people have freedom and transformation in understanding their identity in Christ. For me, that just my own personal life, that was my breakthrough as a teenager, understanding who I am in Christ. So when I came to college, I was just on fire with that. To me, that's what got me really into wanting to counsel others, which helped him enter into that realization more and more. So that's really my main drive. I specialize in sexual issues, in particular same-sex attraction, because for me, I see that as an area that the church has, really fumbled quite a bit on how to address that properly. And so I see a lot of my brothers and sisters who struggle with same-sex attraction or gender identity confusion or distress, and their transformation is being cut short. They're plateauing in different ways, and the church is offering inadequate help in a lot of ways, or those who are offering good help are being marginalized and demonized, vilified, thrown under a bus in a lot of ways. So I started my YouTube channel like back in 2018 because there was this whole intellectual dark web that was emerging.
Yes, indeed.
And I figured Jordan Peterson's carving a space for people to talk about difficult subjects.
That's exactly right.
Who's going to represent those who are going to talk about the most misrepresented subject, conversion therapy? You know, therapy for those who want to explore change in their sexual attractions. And that was still the most taboo subject. You want to talk about controversy? I just step into it. So I'm like, there's no one else really jumping into this arena. So I figured, hey, might as well. I already do speaking engagements. So I figured, let me at least start posting my speaking engagements. But then I'm like, I got plenty of other things to say. So I just been trucking, I got barely any subscribers. If I get 200 views on a video, I'm happy.
Yeah.
But it's a niche market, and I'm below the radar enough that I'm not getting a whole lot of opposition. I started making my channel though, like after Adpocalypse. I don't know if you remember that, 2017.
I do not remember that.
Oh, that was like when Steven Crowder got kicked off and he wasn't able to monetize his videos.
Yeah. I do remember that.
And so that's when YouTube really started cracking down on the type of content they'll allow on their platform. So I sort of been shadow banned in some ways. A lot of people have told me they found my channel by accident or after having to search a long time to find anything. So it's hard to get this information out there. There are people who are just desperate to find some truth.
It's true, yeah.
And the world only has one narrative. And so
I want to kind of orient people to the kind of discussion that we're having today. Like, I honestly don't know. I'm not afraid to be controversial, but I don't really know exactly what you endorse for sure. So I want people to see this conversation as a conversation. We're not like Christian teachers trying to teach people what to believe or what to do. All we're doing is just both trying to share some perspective. So I told Andrew when we started off, I'm like, honestly, like I've been a pastor in the past. I've been doing YouTube for a while. And I also don't think that Christians are doing a good job of addressing issues like same-sex attraction or LGBTQ or the cultural, the stuff about gender. It's confusing. It's confusing to know what to do. What should a Christian do? And how do we do what we believe is right while also treating everybody with dignity and respect? Yeah. What is it that a Christian should do? I think that there are some institutional boundaries, if you will. Like if I'm an individual and like Paula and I, we play volleyball and there's all kinds of people there and we don't have a problem with anybody. There's people of all kinds of sexual orientations and everybody gets along and nobody has a problem. And I have, theological conversations with all these people and nobody's offended. Nobody's ostracized. But if I was acting as a pastor of a denominational church, there would be certain limitations and boundaries that I would have to enact. Like, yes, you can come sit on the pew at our church, but no, you can't do X, Y, Z, something like that. To talk to people like this. So it's very confusing to me. I don't know about confusing, but I'm hoping to get some insights from you delving into this. So how did you come to be a Christian?
Well, my parents, thank God.
Yeah.
My parents have made a lot of mistakes in their lives, but I can say one thing, that they led me to the Lord at a young age. So like for me, it was like literally at a very young age, at like age 4, I accepted Christ. And like, I know it was authentic and genuine because I've always had a passion for worship. For as soon as I could read, I was doing daily devotions.
Yeah.
It's been a regular discipline and practice in my life. Just to, they set an example as well that, hey, we're not perfect. Don't look to us. Look to Jesus.
Right.
So I've just been diligently following him. I never had like a backsliding story. I don't have like that sort of testimony. Just one of faithfully following him my whole life through ups and downs.
Yeah. So how does a Christian, because I was raised in a Christian family too. How does a Christian come to see, how do you come to equip yourself to address this issue of same-sex attraction? Like what brings that about, and what do you do? Like, what do you do to be the guy that's addressing this?
I guess I could just share my story a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So I originally wanted to go into a totally different area of work. Well, I'm an artist. As soon as I could hold a pencil, I was drawing. So my whole life, I just figured I was going to be a comic book artist. But then when I was homeschooled as well, and I had the blessing when I was a sophomore in high school to take a psychology class.
So you're like the Becca kind of homeschooling?
Yeah, we used a Becca and some
Yep.
Bob Jones stuff here and there,
Yep.
and then
I
some
bet
other
Bob Jones, a Becca. I bet. Yep. Same.
a variety of things. So yeah, it's sort of.
I've been the
fundamentalist
subject of
bubble.
that and the implementer of that.
Now the thing is though, just to talk about the fundamentalist stuff and the being a Protestant, all that stuff. Like we're raised Pentecostal, spirit filled.
Yep.
So just this little side tangent. The Pentecostals, we've always felt like the redheaded stepchild of the evangelical world. So that has only continued to progress, where I feel like I ecclesiastically don't really have a home.
Yeah,
So
I understand that.
I'll just put that out there. That's why I resonate with a lot of your content, because you don't fit the mold of evangelicals, and I don't think I do either.
Yeah, same. Yep.
So when I was a sophomore in high school, I took this intro to psychology class, and I just fell in love with it. And I figured I kind of have a knack for just understanding people. And so at first I wanted to combine them and become an art therapist and work with kids with trauma issues. I myself had my own history of, in high school, struggling with lust, compulsive masturbation. And like I was saying earlier, my breakthrough came in understanding my identity in Christ. And in particular, like Romans 8:1. And understand that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And it's kind of a twofold thing. It's not just that he covers us so that we can stand before him, but also he transforms us from within so that we no longer are the same person. So we're new creations. And so just life has been just a constant application of that since. So God started to steer me when I went into college at Assemblies of God College, University of Valley Forge. And as I was just a student there, God just started bringing all these guys across my path who struggle with some sort of sexual issue. You know, whether it was heterosexual pornography struggles or same-sex attraction, but there was definitely an issue on campus with guys with same-sex attraction. And so God really just brought these guys across my path. And,
what campus was this again?
University of Valley Forge.
Okay.
And it used to be called Valley Forge Christian College. They changed the name several years back.
So is it still a Christian college, and there's people there struggling with same-sex attraction in a Christian college?
Yeah. Now, at the time, they didn't have any counseling services on campus. So the way student life would handle any students dealing with some sort of sexual struggle, whether it was acting out homosexually or having sex with their girlfriend or pornography, was kind of arbitrary. So, and especially when it came to same-sex attraction, it was sort of a don't ask, don't tell kind of approach. So I increasingly became friends with different guys who were struggling with these issues, and they were terrified to talk about it because they didn't want to get kicked out of the school. So I ended up doing an internship my junior year, or between junior and senior year, at a counseling practice in Lancaster, PA, called Day 7 Ministries. And at the time, they were a member ministry of Exodus International. And Exodus was the former umbrella organization for different ministries dealing with same-sex attraction. And so this was a counseling center. They specialize in all sorts of sexual issues, not just homosexuality, but that was one of the main issues. And I got to participate in the recovery groups where guys with same-sex attraction and guys with heterosexual sex addiction were working together in support group settings. And that was just a powerful internship experience. Came back from that, more guys who I'm friends with or just getting to know opened up to me. Long story short, God put it on my heart to start up a support group on campus. And so I had to propose this idea to Student Life. And the director of Student Life did not like the idea because they had the mentality that if they have a support group they can go to, then they won't come to Student Life so we can discipline them.
So that we can discipline them?
Literally, that's what he told me. So
oh my.
we butted heads because he even said that, well, if you even did start up a group, then if any of the guys in the group confessed to breaking one of the rules of conduct at the school, then you'd have to report them to student life. So there'd be no confidentiality. And I'm like, that's not how this works. And so
yeah, you can't have effectiveness if you have that kind of, if you have so it's not psychologically or emotionally safe if you got these consequences constantly bearing down on you and you can't.
Oh yeah, so that's why all the students were terrified. And so it's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell kind of environment.
Yeah.
And so fortunately there was another professor there who had a same heart as I did about this issue, and we connected. And he had guys he was working with, you know, individually as like an accountability partner. I had some guys I was working with, and I'm like, let's team up, let's do something. And so I ended up having one of the therapists at the counseling practice I had interned at come and speak on campus. And it was kind of funny how this came together, because it all kind of came together near the end of the semester, and I had like a week to promote this thing. And so I'm like, I need to like make this provocative. So I got these flyers with the information, and on one flyer it said, "Who wants to talk about sex?" And the other flyer said, "Come out." And I got them stamped and I posted them all over campus, but then Student Life regretted approving the poster, and so they started tearing them down. They turned them down, I put them back up, and I'm like, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. And the guys I'm trying to reach out to, they're real apprehensive about starting any sort of group. But once you know, like 100 students come out to this event to hear this counselor speak, and the very guys I was trying to reach out to all came. And at the end of that, like, all right, we're ready to start something up. So this professor and I ran this support group for one school year. And then what happened was there was a group on campus already for girls who were recovering from some sort of trauma or abuse. Okay. And they wanted to bring on campus a male version of that. And at this point, I had already graduated, but I was still living in the area, and my wife was still a student. And so I'm like, I want to leave the school in a better state than how I came in. So let me at least volunteer to do this. And so I was working on my office job, and then after work, I'd lead this group. And it was called Moving On. It was just presented as a group for guys dealing with pain from their past. And every school year, I ran this group for 8 years. Every school year, half the guys were dealing with same-sex attraction, other half were dealing with heterosexual porn issues. And so even though it was promoted as an abuse support group or trauma support group, that was the population. And so just with working with the guys, you see the patterns, you know, doing the internship, you see that there's certain patterns. Also, I read the books. Fortunately, our school library had a lot of books from the leaders from Exodus, the founding members like Joe Dallas and Andrew Comiskey and Frank Worthen, so a lot of those big names who were the leaders of this whole ex-gay ministry movement. And so I was blessed that the school had their books on file in the library. And so I devoured their books, and that gave a lot of insight into the root issues of same-sex attraction. And what I found too is I can relate to a lot of the struggles that they dealt with. I could relate to loneliness, being bullied as a kid. It turned out differently for me. The manifestation of my issues were a bit different in some ways, but there are some areas where I could see why it turned out different for me than it did for them. But I just developed more and more a passion for the work I do, especially when I see how they're the neglected population.
So did you notice with this passion and with these people coming to these sessions, did you notice a positive change in them as they would attend these things? And if so, how soon would you start to notice these kinds of changes?
That's a good question, because it does vary. And for the ones who start to do the work, people change on a continuum. For some guys, the breakthrough...
What change on a continuum?
Change is on a continuum in general.
Okay, yeah.
So as they're doing the work, for one guy, he would share with me, just as I meet my needs, my basic needs, you know, basic core needs for attachment with other guys, non-sexual attachment with other guys, to feel that sense of community, to emotionally regulate, I start to acknowledge his trauma. I got one guy that always stands out to me when I think about this, who he had a lot of trauma from growing up in a home with an abusive alcoholic father. And so he was very emotionally dissociated. He could tell me just kind of plainly how his dad was abusive, but there'd like be no emotion to it. But then later, like something with his roommate would bother him and all the anger would come up. And so as we started to work through those issues, work through the process of forgiveness and healing, then you start to see the change. And he would tell me, it's like, you know, when I'm meeting my needs in healthy ways, the SSA doesn't have a pull.
Oh, wow.
For other guys, it was simply just the big breakthrough for them was just having a space finally where they could share honestly and openly. Yeah, I had one guy in the group. He was an older student. He was in his 30s when he was a student there. And he was molested as a kid. And he carried with him all his years the guilt of that. And he literally believed that he seduced his abuser.
Oh, wow. Goodness.
That's the lie that he was convinced of. And so that comes with, that's
I've seen that a lot.
lies.
And I've seen that a lot. When
yeah.
Paul and I watch a lot of documentaries about abuse that happens in churches, and there's a lot of underage people who are in relationships with adults, and of course it's inappropriate. And then the underage person feels somehow culpable for what's going on, and they feel compelled to keep it quiet and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few dynamics at play that make that reality. Is the kids, the younger you are, the more you believe you're responsible for things that happen in your life, in your world. So that's why it's important. Like when parents divorce, counselors always tell parents to make a point to explain it's not your fault, because kids are just naturally egotistical, or egocentric in some way. So they at least think that things are about them, even if they're not. But then on top of it, molestation. It's just already molestation tells you that you wanted this. The abuser will even tell them you wanted this. This is what love is. All this stuff. So I may be throwing you off course, but I've always wondered this. Is there and I don't know if you know this, I don't know if there's a statistic on this. Is there a statistic for those who experienced some kind of sexual trauma while they were underage correlated with those who struggle with attraction or inordinate attraction of any kind when they become adults? I don't have the exact stat on me, but we're looking at 30 to 40% of men. Lesbians, about 85% have been sexually molested by a male. There's a huge correlation there.
Okay, I want to interject here because I want to bring in some evidences, or at least explanation of where I'm getting these stats I'm throwing out off the top of my head. So pardon me, I really should be careful about using statistics when I don't have them memorized. I'm not Ben Shapiro. I don't have statistics off the top of my head I can just quote like that. I wish I had his brain and I could do that easily. But I know the gist of the research that's out there. I just don't always have the exact figures or where the citations for them either. But I do have some videos where I've gotten into this before, in particular my series on the gay agenda is real and the gay agenda is coming for your children. And so in that second part of that series, I go over some of the research on the sad, unfortunate trend of people with same-sex attraction having been at greater risk or greater incidence of childhood sexual abuse. That's just childhood sexual abuse. They're also, in adulthood, I have other research, I just didn't think to look it up right now, as adults they're at greater risk of sexual risk-taking and sexual assault. And that's probably due more to their lifestyle. But to provide some receipts to what I'm trying to say, Roberts, Glymour, and Koenen, from a 2013 study, does maltreatment in childhood affect sexual orientation in adulthood? From the Archives of Sexual Behavior, volume 42. they found that adult homosexuals experience childhood sexual abuse at 2 to 4 times greater prevalence than heterosexuals. Yeah. Also, there was a study by Tomeo, Templer, Anderson, and Kotler from 2001, comparative data of childhood and adolescence molestation in heterosexual and homosexual persons, showed that 46% of gay men versus 7% of heterosexual men, and 22% of lesbian women versus 1% of heterosexual women were homosexually molested in childhood. So, of their type of molestation, it was particularly by someone of the same sex. Another study by Holmes and Slapp from 1998, Sexual Abuse of Boys, Definition, Prevalence, Correlates, Sequelae, and Management, showed that adolescent boys, particularly those victimized by males, were up to 7 times more likely to identify as homosexual or bisexual than peers who were not molested. So you see a huge incidence or correlation between sexual assault, sexual molestation, rape, and subsequent same-sex attraction or homosexual identification or non-heterosexuality. Now, I throw out this stat there, about 85% of lesbians have been survivors of sexual assault. Not just necessarily childhood sexual abuse, but it could have been as adults they were sexually assaulted by a male. And I was given this quote, this stat off the top of my head because it's something that always stood out to me when I was doing research for a paper when I was in college. However, like a college student, I only documented the book that I found it in, not the actual article that the book was citing. So the book was from Yamamoto, The Crisis of Homosexuality from 1990. And so I wish I had thought to actually put the actual study that Yamamoto was citing, but that 85% figure has always stuck in my head. Now, I just now ordered a copy of that book so I can actually find that study. I've had difficulty finding the study that he was citing. It's such an old study at this point. So once I get that book and I can find that citation, I will update the description of this video for that citation. So if I were to correct some things, I would say that perhaps the percentage of women with same-sex attraction being survivors of sexual assault or childhood sexual abuse is less than 85% most likely, but it's still pretty high. In an informal or non-academic survey of women who are in counseling for same-sex attraction, Anne Palk, in her book Restoring Sexual Identity, reported that 90% experienced some form of abuse, and 66% of that was sexual abuse. Now, it's just among women who are seeking counseling for their same-sex attraction. So, so I don't know what the actual figure may be, but I've seen other studies showing pretty high, maybe not up to 66%, but there are higher than the heterosexual population percentages of women who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's what caused it, but it certainly should be considered as a contributing factor. I am very wary of people saying, oh, if you experience abuse, then that's why you're gay. That's why you have same-sex attraction. Like, it's too reductive, I think, because ultimately it's even trauma itself. You can't even say that someone's traumatized if they had that experience, because trauma is not the experience itself, but your reaction to that experience. And so there are some who can actually be resilient or anti-fragile, who bounce back from such experiences, usually because they had the right support system and good attachment around them after they experienced an assault or abuse. And so it might have been a highly stressful experience, but they recovered from it quicker.
Now, that doesn't account for every case. So when you understand more about the developmental model, you understand that there are explanations for the exceptions. But
so when you say the developmental model, you're talking about like Piaget and things like that?
Mostly referring to, if you're familiar with Joseph Nicolosi, he's the founder of authentic reparative therapy. And he used Elizabeth Moberly's theories on the reparative drive theory. That, in general, what you see is that homosexuality, or at least the same-sex attraction, is reparative in its function. That what drives a person towards seeking or to eroticize someone of the same sex is to repair unmet attachment needs within themselves.
Oh, wow.
And so when you
yeah. This is going to be on YouTube, but I still feel like I need to take notes.
Sure. Now, I want to backtrack real quick before I go any further, because I was telling a story about the school, and I just want to make a point that about a year into me leading the group that I was running, the head of the student life department changed. And so from that point forward, I've only ever had support from the school. So at first I had a lot of opposition from them, but then it changed. So I just want to make that clear, that the school did become very supportive.
I think I derailed you with some of my questions.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's go back to, say, what we call with the reparative drive theory. Now, the basic idea is you have to understand what is necessary for development, especially when it comes to sexual development and gender identity development. It starts with attachment with mom. Yep. Attachment with mom gives you your first basic sense of who you are as an individual, and that you are worthy of love. And that others, or at least someone close to you, can be trusted to love you and provide good for you. You know, provide your basic needs. And so when a mom is properly attuned and attached and attentive, that sets the child up for a good, secure identity, so that I'm good, and therefore, and also others are good, and therefore I also have something good to offer others. Boys, between the ages of 3 to 5, they have another developmental task that girls don't have, and that is their gender identity development, or their gender identity achievement. And that's where they have to separate to some degree from mom and bond with dad.
Wow.
And so dad has to be very active in a young boy's life when he's a toddler and in the play age. And so dad becomes his gateway into the world of men. So that he's a model for what it means that he is not mom. He is not the same sex as her. He's different from her. I'm actually going to grow up to be like dad. And that's a good thing. For a boy to want to become like dad, to emulate dad, he needs to perceive the father as two things. He needs to be a salient father. And to be salient, he needs to have two qualities. He needs to be perceived as strong and benevolent. So he's powerful, but he uses power for good. And so when you have a father who's, well, one, just either not, so
he can't be strong and tyrannical.
Exactly. Strong and but also not strong and passive. I'm working with a client right now who his dad was very effeminate, and he didn't have a model for masculinity. And so this guy ended up developing transgender identification for a period, and then same-sex attraction, and he was never affirmed in his masculinity, definitely not by his dad, because his dad wasn't secure in his own masculinity.
So it's sounding to me like having two parents is crucially important for development.
Definitely, of course. Yeah, I mean, it should be.
Well, I mean, it's obvious. It seems obvious, but so I think there's something happening in the culture right now where people are asking the question. So what I'm trying to do is like maybe steel man some of the gender stuff, steel man some of the stuff that would go against typical Christianity, and say what is really going on here. And it seems to me that society in general is questioning how much of our culture is by nature, like how much of the way that we be as a culture, male and female, and our roles and that sort of thing, how much of that is natural and basically immutable, or instinctive, maybe is a better word for it, and how much of it is purely arbitrarily enculturated and could be another way if we wanted it to be another way. I think it's a fair question to ask. I don't necessarily, I don't know that people know that that's the question they're asking. Does that make sense? I think it's a fair question to ask. I don't agree with all the answers that are coming out, but I do think it's a fair question to ask. I mean, when it comes down to like gender roles and things, like I'm married, my wife is completely feminine, I'm completely masculine, but sometimes she likes to mow the yard and I like to do the dishes. You know, we don't have you know, typical gender roles don't really matter to us. We just do what we want to do, what we feel like doing, and what we agree to, because we're the ones that have to live with each other.
Yeah.
So I think people are trying to suss out the arbitrariness from society and figure out how much of that is arbitrary. And just like a kid trying to see how much of the rules that their parents made, how much can they break them and get away with it? Where is my boundary really? It's almost like society is toying with this. And of course, there's many instances where we're going way over the line, but it seems like they're just asking this question: how arbitrary is our society? How arbitrary are our cultures and traditions? Yeah,
for sure. This is one of the areas where I'm very critical of the church, at least in America, because I grew up when I was in elementary school, going to a particular church where we worship God and football.
Yeah.
And you were really, really damned if you didn't worship football. Like, you just could not
relate to the
boys.
I saw a truck. I don't even know if I can say this out loud. It was a pickup truck, and it said something about Jesus, beer, girls, and football, or something like that.
You know, and so we have a really reductionistic idea of what masculinity is, at least in America. And so I would say the woke activist types, they have a little bit of a point when they're trying to challenge these stereotypes, what it means to be masculine.
Right. I think there is some signal in there. I think the conclusions are crazy, but I think there is some signal in the questioning.
Exactly. We don't do ourselves any favor when all we do is double down on the historic stereotypes of masculinity. What we need to do is return to more classic, an appreciation for the multiple archetypes of masculinity. You know, there's the warrior archetype. That's one we honor the most, right? But there's also the gardener archetype, the philosopher poet archetype, the artist archetype of being masculine, the husband archetype of what it means to really care for others, to be tender and nurturing. There's all these other historic ideas of what it means to be masculine that we don't give their proper place. And so when you have a boy who maybe through development, but probably mostly through temperament, just doesn't quite fit in to the stereotypes of masculinity, and the dad doesn't know how to relate to him, and doesn't affirm his masculinity just in the very unique way that he is, then that creates a gender insecurity. Might not lead to, say, transgender identification, but at least a sense that I'm not man enough. I can't tell you how much that's, at least 3/4 of my clients, they fit this type. There's different subtypes of same-sex attraction. The majority are those who have a sense that they're not masculine enough. It gets compounded when they also have, say, older brothers or who put them down, who bully them, when they have peers who don't relate to them well, who they're already on the outside of others, outside of just the relationship with their dad. So it's not always just dad's fault not affirming them, but like you can have a guy who had a good enough relationship with dad, but he still was bullied enough by other boys. He was ostracized. Like, to develop secure enough masculinity is a bit of a community effort. It really helps to have multiple streams supporting you in your masculine identification.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the idea is that normally, or at least normative sexual development, is that you so identify with your own sex that by the time puberty hits, what you most desire is what becomes eroticized. All right, so if we understand it this way, that sexual attraction is all about seeing the other as a good for you. When I'm secure enough in my masculinity, and I see that I am a gift, God created us to be a gift,
Yeah.
then I'm going to want to give my gift to the one that is least like me,
There we go. Yeah.
the
So
other
it's
sex.
complementary. I hate.
That's what
I'm not
compliment-
trying to say complementarianism. I'm
But
just
this is true complementarian. We
Yeah.
have the wrong idea of complementarianism
right.
in most of our evangelical churches.
Mm-hmm.
It's very chauvinistic,
Right. Right.
the stereotype that we see of complementarianism. True complementarianism is about seeing the beauty in the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see other as different, now you also need to see the other as different and good in herself.
Mm-hmm.
When you have those components where you have an embodied sense of your own goodness and identification as a male, for example, and then you have an embodied sense of the other as good and as different from you, then that's where you see the greatest difference and greatest deficit of, oh, this is what I need. This goes back to Adam. God recognized that it's not good for Adam to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a deficit. So one of the things I explain to my clients is, or really they just discovered on their own, and then I sort of say this and it helps confirm it for them, is the greater the deficit, the greater the desire.
Oh, interesting.
So
are we saying? I think I'm hearing that same-sex attraction might come from a recognition or a subconscious recognition of a deficit of masculinity in a male.
correct. The sexual urge will always go where the greatest desire is.
Wow.
And where the greatest deficit is, that's where the greatest desire will be.
Yeah.
So the true image of God, if you actually understand, go into more the Imago Dei, what it means to be made in the image of God.
Image of God,
It's not arbitrary that Scripture says, in the beginning he made them male and female, in the image of God he made them. That it places our design as male and female
Mm-hmm.
right there when mentioning the image of God.
Yeah, right there, Genesis 1:26 and 27.
Not arbitrary, because it's sharing that intrinsic to our being made in God's image is that we're male and female and called to become one flesh.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that Pope John Paul II would teach about in his Theology of the Body. So I'm a big student of his. And so it reflects God's own communal nature as a Trinity. And so we're made to be relational in nature. So the image of God is actually male and female together. It's not just, individually I am made in God's image, but the full representation of that is in the male and female together.
Well, some of the names of God are feminine, like El Shaddai means it means something like a multi-breasted nurturing mother is what El Shaddai means.
There's some other really interesting tidbits too, like say the Hebrew word for mercy. Oh, what is it? Rakamim, I think. It means womb. God's mercy is like a womb in which he holds us and protects us. So it's like there's feminine characteristics. So women image God in his femininity, and men image God in his masculinity. If we understand masculinity and femininity as different ways of relating.
So it's like we can't really portray the image of God without each other.
Exactly. Yes.
Wow.
Pope John Paul II would say that creation is male and female, and marriage is the ultimate symbol, the greatest sacrament, the greatest symbol of who God is, and actually the gospel as well. That if the purpose of Christ's coming, the incarnation, was to reveal God's heart and to become united with us, as he talks about in John 16 and 17. It's like, may they be one as you and I are one. And if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He came to reveal the Father's heart to us. And so we get a sense that my greatest need is for union. Now, marriage in this life, though, is still ultimately a sign of the greatest union that we're really meant for. Because we're called to participate in the divine life as the bride of Christ. So even for those who don't marry in this life, you're still made for marriage. All humans are called to marriage. But not all of us participate in the earthly sign of that marriage. We're all called to the heavenly marriage.
Okay.
And that's our union with Christ. That's a bride, in which we get to participate in the life of the Trinity.
Yeah, I
So,
find it interesting that so with a Baptist background, I would always think something like, these Catholics, they take a vow of celibacy. What would they know about marriage? And then, like what you're saying about what John Paul II has put out seems very profound. And then I have also read a lot of Richard Rohr's information, who's also Franciscan friar, who also has a vow of celibacy. I'm like, as a Baptist, I'd be like, what can he possibly know? But it turns out that he's got some very profound and very helpful things that have very much helped my wife and I. So it's this strange, ironic
I know
thing.
you think about it, but I'm like, well, if you're a priest and you're hearing confessions day after day after day, you get to become very familiar with human nature and relationships.
Yeah, I would also
gain
think
some real
that
insights.
you get some really good interactive practice, like how to practice interactively and in a non-egoic way, because you're dealing with somebody about offenses that aren't really against you personally.
Yeah.
Somebody recently said that, I was listening, I can't remember, it was somebody that stemmed from the intellectual dark web. They said that therapy has become the secular replacement for confession.
Yeah, it's true. It is. And like therapists are treated like the priests. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know.
Now, quick interjection. I already made a clip out of this section that removed this little discussion about Richard Rohr, so it's more concise and just straight sticks to the point about what are the causes of same-sex attraction, or just sexual attraction in general. What is sexual attraction? So check out that clip. I think it's a really succinct distillation of what I teach. But I want to comment here real quick on Richard Rohr. I didn't want to derail the interview, so I didn't really say anything in response to him bringing up Richard Rohr. But I have serious concerns about Richard Rohr and the influence he's had on people who are primarily coming from an evangelical background. Here he is, supposedly a Catholic. I think he's Franciscan friar. And he has a greater influence among evangelical Christians or ex-evangelicals, people who are deconstructing. And I first became more aware of him in 2020 when Kevin Max, formerly of DC Talk, put on his Facebook page that the universal Christ that Rohr teaches is the Jesus that he believes in. And so I'm like, universal Christ, what's that about? So I looked up the book and I started reading on it and watched a bunch of videos by Richard Rohr, and I realized, okay, I need to address this because I think this is a major concern. This is a big factor, and I've seen a lot of common threads. All the deconstructionists that I was studying and researching kept referring back to Richard Rohr and the Enneagram, which I have big concerns with as a therapist, a Christian counselor. People using that as like a personality tool when it's actually an occult tool. So I've been wanting to do a video on Richard Rohr, so I did a deep dive into him several years ago at this point. But then things about homosexuality got more relevant, and so my channel has just been so focused on sexual issues for the past few years. I will eventually get around to talking about Richard Rohr more. But I have a lot of grace for people like Kevin because he's coming from that super fundamentalist background, and when you come from that background, I can understand the appeal of someone like Richard Rohr who's talking about the symbolism and more of a contemplative practice. And when you're stuck in a form of evangelicalism that is all about propositional knowing, and then you get disillusioned with it all, Rohr's teachings can be very appealing, like a breath of fresh air. I get that. I can understand the appeal. But I am and the thing is, though, I watch his content, and it's stuff that seems profound to me should be common sense to people. But I guess for those who've been deprived of such more symbolic thinking, more sacramental thinking, more traditional forms of Christianity like Orthodoxy and Catholicism, it sounds way more profound. But original source that you hear something profound from, usually you then have more allegiance to. So they don't think to go outside Richard Rohr to discover those same teachings. When he does, for whatever thing he does say that is true, you can get that same sort of teaching other sources. So I think it just garners a lot of loyalty to him because he's the source they first encounter when they're looking for something deeper, more contemplative than what they encounter in propositional type churches. The problem is, I am convinced that his perennialism, panentheism, and his universal Christ doctrine, or really heresy, are all counterfeits of the sacramental worldview that I've come to discover and appreciate from Theology of the Body, from Pope John Paul II, as well as my foray into Eastern Orthodoxy, studying, listening to Jonathan Majot and the Lord of Spirits podcasts, and Michael Heiser. So, like I said, one day I'll get around to doing a full treatment of Richard Rohr. But I want to add that, not so much as a disclaimer, like I want to distance myself from Kevin, but just to clarify more how I approach this.
Integrated attraction is rooted in seeing the necessity of the other.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I need to have a good attachment with the other sex, as well as enough of attachment with my own sex so that I don't experience a deficit within myself that I need to have my masculinity affirmed. So if that is not adequately there by the time puberty comes, then my sexual urge is going to direct itself toward where I see the greatest deficit. So
it's very important for young men to have men in their lives, to model masculinity for them and to instill that in them.
Yeah, to accept them as they are as men and affirm that in them. So they have a recognition, even if I'm different than a lot of other guys, I'm still secure enough that I am a man. I am a good. I'm meant to be a good gift.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the work we do is in helping identify where those distortions are, and kind of, especially when there are certain key moments, key memories, even their frequent experiences. With the type of therapy I do, which is reintegrative therapy, we reprocess those experiences that were fundamental in developing our insecure sense of gender identity and security. And
so I want you to, maybe I want to try to re-say that. Reintegrative therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going back and you're helping somebody reprocess those developmental things that they may have missed.
Correct.
Now that sounds extremely helpful probably for anybody to be able to go do that.
Yeah, that's why we present reintegrative therapy as just a trauma and addictions therapy. And we find that it's helpful for men who are looking to explore fluidity in their sexual attractions. So but the reality is I use reintegrative therapy techniques with clients with same-sex attraction, with heterosexual sexual addiction issues, with fetishes, with any sort of trauma issue. So
what is that? What is reintegrative therapy techniques? What is that?
So it's kind of a combination of adaptive information processing therapy techniques like EMDR or Flash, visual schema displacement
I've heard
therapy.
of EMDR. I haven't heard of Flash.
Flash is developed by Philip Manfield. It was started off as like a shortcut for EMDR, where instead of focusing on the memory over and over, you can reprocess the memory more subliminally without directly thinking about it the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So you use a positive focus, and you're doing bilateral stimulations and then blinking while focusing on something positive, and then you go back to the original memory, which is still in the working memory, because you bring it up, you get a sense of the distress, and you go back to that. So we work on either the trauma, but we can also use the same techniques that we use in trauma reprocessing to also reprocess arousal templates. So where you have like a memory that has trauma embedded in it, we also have memories that have arousal embedded in them. And you can use the same reprocessing techniques to basically dissolve the arousal experience that's associated with that memory or experience. So we use...
would you know? Would you know if you had arousal that was what if you have arousal that's attached to an experience or a memory, but you're not aware of that attachment? Does that happen? You have to find that.
Yeah. So we actually work backwards. So the standard reintegrative therapy protocol is we actually invite the client to bring up an arousal experience.
Okay.
So maybe a fantasy or maybe an actual sexual experience.
Mm-hmm.
This is what kind of makes this particular type of therapy kind of difficult for a lot of conservatives, because they're like, well, aren't we supposed to flee sexual immorality? And like our instinct as
even
Christians,
the thought of
a lot of
wickedness
times,
is sin.
is to suppress and squash anything associated with the same-sex attraction that we're trying to change.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another aspect of what we do is we present reintegrative therapy as a mindful approach.
Okay.
So
it's another bad word. People are afraid of the word mindful.
I know. Yeah, it's another triggering one. But I explain this is not Zen Buddhism. It is about developing mastery over your attention, what you pay attention to, and to be able to self-regulate in doing that. So,
Ian Gilchrist calls attention a moral act. What you attend to. Yeah.
So what we explain to clients at the outset is we're neither taking a pro-gay approach to your same-sex attraction, where, oh, if I feel attraction, I should affirm that this means I'm gay, I have a sexual orientation, and that I should explore this and embrace it. No, we're not going to take a pro-gay approach, nor are we taking an anti-gay approach, where if I feel the attractions or have the urges, that I'm going to shame myself and suppress it and bounce my eyes, all this stuff.
Right.
We tell them we're going to take a mindful approach, where we're going to look into the attractions, into the arousal experiences, even the behavior, and use that as our guide into what the underlying needs, desires, and wounds are. So with the standard reintegrative protocol, we have a few protocols that we're developing or have developed. The standard one is where we go to the fantasy or the arousal experience, and we ask them to find the peak moment and really try to get into it. Like actually invite them to feel the feelings as intensely as you can. So go to that peak moment, and then I gauge 0 to 10 how arousing is the experience right now. I want the most arousing experience. And so maybe it's like, oh, I'm having sex with this guy, and okay. So then we invite them to do a gaze inversion. The main point is to get them to certain levels of awareness. So
when you say gaze, you're talking about G-A-Z-Y? G-A-Z-E?
G-A-Z-E. So I asked them to imagine at that peak moment, if they were able to step outside their body and then look into their own eyes at that moment. So as they're like in that euphoric moment, what do they see when they look into their own face? And we just ask them, just keep looking without judging and describe what you see.
Without judging is important, yeah.
And the first level awareness will usually be what we call a trance state, where it's the most euphoric experience. And maybe there's a feeling state associated with it, like I'm powerful or I'm wanted, I'm loved, stuff like that. And then as they peer into it more, we might ask more, okay, so we might get a sense of what they're looking for, or they might just come up on their own, and they get a sense of this next level of awareness is what they're desiring. I'm desiring to be wanted by this man, to be affirmed. And then the third level might be, what is the wound underneath that? Because then it might be, well, what is it like to desire it but not have it? When have you not felt that? Oh, then that brings it to the pain. And so we just invite them, okay, get in touch with that feeling, the pain of not getting that need met. What's the earliest time you can remember that? Earliest, or at least the most profound. The earlier the better, of course. So they go back to that. So now we're out of the fantasy, and now we're into a memory. And maybe it's a time that they're being bullied or abused, rejected, ostracized, excluded, etc. And that's where then we use some sort of trauma reprocessing approach. And so we reprocess trauma. It might be with EMDR. I don't use EMDR as much as I used to. I might do something like Flash, or one of my favorites is to use just image transformation therapy, or mindful self-compassion, where you imagine them stepping into the memory. So they see their younger self, and you imagine yourself as the adult stepping into the memory, and you're going to be like the big brother that you never had. And you're going to interact.
IFS a little bit, huh?
Yeah, a bit like IFS. And so you're going to give yourself the compassion that you didn't get in that memory.
Yes.
And that's oftentimes one of the most powerful experiences, and sometimes the most difficult. So sometimes I hunker down there with clients. I work with a guy right now who he cannot look at his younger self. And there's such a disconnect.
Right. Right.
Well, that's what we're going to work on. So I had clients who their first reaction is to want to go into the memory of their younger self and slap their younger self.
Oh, wow.
Because of all the shame that they've internalized. And like, we got to work on that. Because if you cannot heal the boy if you don't love the boy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that younger self, that inner child, that is the one who's acting out in your present day unwanted sexual behaviors. He's emerging in some way in the present day. And if you want that to change in the present, you've got to heal that inner child. And you can't heal him if you don't love him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, the inner child is a representation of your emotional core.
Yeah. So there's like what I've noticed in doing shadow work is that there's a component of having to love those unwanted parts of yourself in order to reintegrate them, because we're basically enculturated into hating certain parts of ourselves. Oh, there's a part of me that would do this evil thing, so I hate it and I repress it and I'm trying to get rid of it and hide it and change it and all this. But in order to really deal with it, we have to learn to love every aspect of ourselves and reintegrate it in, something like that.
Yeah. So as I do that work, as we see the distress associated with that memory, and they brought healing to it, then I go back to the arousal experience. I ask them, go back to the peak moment. What do you notice now? And there's a sense of detachment from it.
Wow.
Like it just doesn't do anything for me anymore. And that's why it's important to start with the arousal experience, because I need to see if what we're doing actually has an impact on that. Like, how do I know if this is going to work if we don't actually first get into the arousal and we can know, oh, this is a strong arousal experience. Now we go to this trauma therapy, and now the arousal experience.
So you're establishing a baseline so that you can know how much effectiveness has transpired.
Exactly. So that's with our main protocol. We have other ones we do as well. But the core of it is actually getting them into a state of what we call assertion, where they're feeling and dealing. Yeah, assertion.
Okay.
So the assertive self state is one in which you're feeling your feelings and dealing with your feelings. You're well regulated, you're connected to others. And what we know is when guys are in that state on a regular basis, the temptation of homosexuality doesn't have anything to latch onto. So for any temptation to have a pull and appeal, there has to be a lack. There has to be a need. But when you're whole enough, or at least you're dealing with your emotions properly and you're regulated, you're connected with others. You even feel like you have a wound that comes up. If you properly deal with it, then the temptation is going to have any pull. What takes people out of that is a shame experience. And what precedes that is what we call a double bind, where I feel something, but I'm not allowed to express it. I'll make things worse.
If I can pause you for a second and try to steal your thunder, it almost sounds like what the university was trying, the scenario of the university you were talking about earlier was before it became completely, simpatico with what you were doing. It seemed like it was creating that shame and double bind and stigma. In other words, their moral stance against something being the case actually winds up exacerbating it and making it worse and preventing any healing.
So that's the trouble I get into sometimes, to kind of bring us to the comment section that we're interacting in, is when I'm dealing with more other conservative Christians, they still propagating the shame by always referring to the attractions themselves as if you committed a sin just by experiencing the attractions. And that approach just further increases the shame that's actually at the root to the attractions. It's a shame that drives the sense that I'm not masculine enough, and therefore increases the desire for the opposite, the same sex, it's in an erotic manner. It's when I feel whole enough as a man, I don't want to eroticize another male. I want to be his friend. I want to be his mentor, or like a father figure. I don't want to use him as an object. So I want to treat him as a good, objectively. So when we just approach this as a pure sin issue. That, oh, why do people struggle with same-sex attraction? Because of sin, and therefore they have to repent. If that's our only way of explaining this whole issue, that's what ends up ultimately, I think, leading people to more of the liberal kind of approach to this, and adoption and acceptance and embrace and more affirmation or accommodation approaches.
So, speaking of this sin and the moralistic approach, I honestly, I didn't know what to expect when we were going to start talking. And there was part of me that was suspecting that there would be more of a moralistic approach. And I'm not hearing that at all. And I feel like I'm admittedly learning a lot more than I expected to learn some things from this conversation, but it's probably about 4 times as much as I expected. This is amazing information, and the way you're presenting things, I mean, you're very articulate and you're explaining things in a very graspable way that make a lot of sense without being moralizing and stigmatizing. I think that's very profound.
Yeah, I can't moralize my clients. Like that's the Holy Spirit's job. So it's like, and I work with anyone. I work with Christians, non-Christians, people who aren't even religious, Muslims. I got a lot of Muslim clients looking for help in this area, Jews. And so, like, if I approach it moralistically, then we get bogged down there, and they're not going to get the adequate help they really need.
Right.
So most of them are already doing the moralistic approach themselves. They tried it. It's not working. I just got to repent more. I just got to, like, white knuckle it. And that's the approach you get when all you're working on is the behavior. I'm looking at the whole person, the mind, will, emotions, behavior.
The past, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Paula, my wife, we recently watched a movie called Boy Erased.
Oh, gosh.
You ever heard of that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I've read enough reviews from those who have.
Russell Crowe is the dad, and he's some kind of preacher, and the young boy winds up, being same-sex attracted and gay, and he's ostracized by the dad, and they try to send the boy to some kind of conversion therapy. Yeah. And every kind of everything is moralistic. Everything is super moralistic, and at the end of the show, they're telling you what happened to everybody, and they show you that one of the main guys who was one of the main teachers,
McCray
is now living happily with his husband somewhere, like they all left, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we got those hit pieces, stuff like that, or hit jobs. I actually work with the ministry that kind of, after Hope for Wholeness closed down eventually, a lot of the remnant of that became Transformation Ministries Alliance. And so I actually am involved with that particular ministry. There's some things that are fabricated in that particular movie, like the scene of them hitting him with Bibles, completely made up. Wasn't even in the book that it was based on. But there have certainly been some errors in some of the approaches used in different ex-gay ministry movements, or different ex-gay ministries. One of the problems that we can run into is thinking that ex-gay ministry was monolithic, or like the different ministries are part of Exodus were all the same. There's a wide variety, and some may lean more the moralistic approach, or at least the, hey, we just need to keep praying or just have accountability, and but also some of them were just pure led. They weren't probably majority of the ministries that were part of Exodus were not run by professional therapists. And so a lot of them are pure led. Now, that said, like, I'm involved in some of those same ministries that exist to this day, like Desert Stream Ministries, which runs the Living Waters program, and very much based on good, sound psychological theory and theology of the body. And so I stand behind a lot of these ministries, but there were some, certainly, that took a more moralistic approach, and and I would say those are the ones that weren't very helpful and that eventually folded. it's the ones that have lasted, that stood the test of time. They're the ones who are going to integrate more psychology and theology together.
Mm-hmm.
So my aim is really to help solidify that base and help Christians see how there's a good marriage between good psychology and theology, and that they shouldn't be at odds necessarily.
I just want you to keep talking.
I can go on and on.
this is quite interesting. So I have to admit, like, I probably have a lot of Dunning-Kruger in this area. Like I am very ignorant, but man, I want to help. You know what I mean? Like, I know this is an area of struggle, like with a society, with different people, and I almost feel like I'm not qualified to desire a specific outcome on behalf of somebody else. Does that make sense? Like, I don't feel like I have the right to tell somebody else what they should want or what they should want to become, right? Especially from a moralistic standpoint. But when you are presenting what you are presenting here, sounds like there are some developmental things that we need to make sure are in place. It's almost like if you were 30 years old and realized you never had any biceps, well, maybe you should start building them. What I'm seeing is like a very basic, fundamental lack of development that should have happened at a particular age that never happened. And so we're trying to go back and reconstruct proper development and help somebody understand themselves. Like you said, it's not anti-gay, it's not pro-gay. So what do people do? Like, let me give you an example. I know somebody who is Christian, been same-sex attracted since being a small child. I mean, they just remember watching a TV show and just being absolutely enamored with the male figure in the TV show. And they even later got married to a woman, and always went to church, always following Christ to the best they could, and always thought that God didn't love them and God was rejecting them because God would not take away their same-sex attraction. It just persisted and persisted and persisted, and they could never get rid of it. What do you think might be going on with this kind of person?
Yeah, well, that's a very common experience, and especially the idea of praying, God, take it away, take this away. And my older brother, my freshman year of college, my older brother came out of the closet. So, or at least my parents approached him and had a suspicion he and his roommate were more than roommates. So that was one of the other, when I had like all these different people in my life, dealing with same-sex attraction or homosexuality, my older brother is one of them. But I can distinctly remember there was times I heard him, down the hallway growing up, I hear him praying, and I think in hindsight, I'm like, I think that's the type of prayer he was praying, where he thought he was rebuking the devil, and I just need to rebuke this and just pray that God take it away. But that's a very common experience, praying, God take it away. The problem is it's a misinformed prayer. God doesn't take away same-sex attraction. He fulfills it. The goal is to fulfill the true good underlying desire beneath the attractions, the true unmet needs for same-sex attachment, affection, approval, identification, affiliation, acceptance, affection. Like, there are legitimate needs that God actually wants to fulfill. So it's not about taking away the attraction, it's allowing the attraction to be your guide to what are the underlying needs that need to be fulfilled. And God also does not heal relational issues in private. This is not saying he's going to solve by you just praying alone in your closet, God, take this away from me. It's going to be in community. It's going to be, whether it's through individual counseling and mentorship, but also in connecting with other guys in healthy, safe ways. It's going to be in the larger church family, being accepted in a larger group.
So how do you know that?
I see it all the time. I see it all the time.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything. How do you know that? Yeah, how do you know that somebody can't heal something by themselves? It has to be communally. How do you know that? And I'm asking you, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah, because like I said, like with Reintegrative Protocol, we start with the attraction, and then we do the work, and then see, how would you know if you've actually been delivered or healed or changed if only you're dealing with it with your mind? The real temptation is with actual people. So at some point, you need to experience real, genuine community. And it's actually through being vulnerable and in sharing your burdens with others that's God's pathway to healing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean I want everyone with same-sex attraction to like indiscriminately share about their struggle with everyone, because that's just not safe.
Right.
You can't trust the larger community with that. So, no, I would love to see it be where we get to the place where we can treat same-sex attraction the way we kind of treat alcohol in the church, where someone who maybe has struggles with alcohol can more openly share that. Yeah, it's still difficult in some settings, but more and more we're understanding of that as a problem that people deal with. You know, but I want to see my grand vision is seeing the larger church speak about sexual struggles as plainly as we do any other sin struggle.
So I guess I want to hammer home, like, there's an experience component to learning, developing, improving, forgiving, healing. There's an experience component. Like, there's certain things that, and I wasn't trying to point you or pigeonhole you like a sophist, but
no.
In Romans 5, we learn things through tribulation, experience, patience, hope, and then the love of God is spread in our hearts. It's these things. I think they might be in a certain order on purpose. Yeah. And I think there's an experience component to learning and understanding and knowing. Like, how do you know what you know? Some things come from experience. So I think some Christians treat the Bible as if the content is exhaustive in its prescriptions for what should be done and how things should be handled. And I don't think it is. Well, in one way it is, because it tells you to look at your experience, and through your experiences, you learn to discern both good and evil. And what I'm hearing from you is that there is a component of by their fruits you shall know them. Let's try this, see how it works out. Let's take everything we know together and put it all together and see what happens here. And then we learn from it. And so there's this experience component. I think, like Solomon studying everything he learned under the sun, bringing it together and putting forth, here's the conclusion of the matter, something like that.
Yeah. So this is a good segue into one of the things you bring up a lot about the 4 different ways of knowing.
Yep.
And a lot of us think, well, we just need to make sure we teach them the truth that man is made for woman, and it's just propositional approach. That all we need to do is instill in them that, no, you're made for woman and woman for man, and that should be sufficient. And they need an embodied experience of themselves as being a good gift. That's not propositional. That's participatory, and that's perspectival, procedural. They need procedures as well. I train my clients in certain mindful approaches for when they have attractions. What do you do when you have an attraction that you don't want? Whether it's a heterosexual unwanted attraction, like say lusting for a woman that you're not married to, or same-sex attraction. What do you do? I train them in procedures that they can self-regulate in the moment. And so they need some of that training, but they also need the actual experience of being affirmed in their masculinity. I think right now it comes to mind one of my clients, who's actually a Muslim client I was working with. Yeah. And we had this session where he was sharing with me about a memory where he was being bullied by some coworkers, or no, it was actually earlier. It was more like adolescence, where they were using a name. He's in France, and so he it's whatever term in France was for like a sissy boy, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's crazy, because you're a man, you're masculine, you're a real man. Like, what's that? He doesn't even present as effeminate, and so it's crazy that to me that they would call him that. And so the session ended. The next week we have our session, and he tells me he cried so much after our last session because that was the first time that anyone ever affirmed him as a man.
Oh, wow.
He went he's in his late 20s, and no one ever affirmed him as a man before. And I just said it kind of casually, thinking it wasn't that big a deal. That I just said, "Oh, that's crazy that they said that about you." And he's like, "No one ever said that to me before." You know, he needed that real life experience of another man who actually is, I'm masculine enough, that affirmed his masculinity. And it wasn't just him having to like coach himself or force himself to believe something, but it was a felt experience. And that was powerful for him. We all need that. And some of us miss out on it. And we need that being made up for in our lives.
Yeah. So what about like external validation of masculinity versus internal validation of masculinity? And should there be a point in time when you have enough internal validation that you no longer need or require external validation?
Yeah, that's a good point. It needs to be internalized. The external needs to be internalized. So yeah, you can't just be passive and just waiting for it to happen either. So that's when I talk about the self states. The assertive self state is one in which you are feeling and dealing. You're being the active agent in your life. You're not just being passive and waiting for your needs to get met passively. Like, well, I hope someone will come around and connect with me and be my friend. It's like, no, you're lonely. You go, make some efforts. Connect with others. Do what you got to do. Meet your needs. You're a man now. You're an adult now. You can't just, when you're children, you're dependent on others. But now I have to help guys who have like developmental deficits meet those needs as adults.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Like as a child, of course, would need external validation coming from someone other than themselves.
Yeah.
And then when you make it to adulthood and you need that external validation or can't function without it or can't emotionally regulate without it, then that, I guess, would you interpret that as being indicative that something went awry during developmental phases that should have happened and didn't?
Yeah, what we see with when people enter into a shame state so often is because they've been shamed in the past. And then they've internalized that tendency. So that when we have these double bind experiences, like they start getting anxious about situations, is because they're anticipating a repeat of past shame experiences. So you can look at nervousness as anticipatory shame. So if they think about going to a party where there'll be other guys who are like, say you got a guy who's not very secure in his masculinity, you know, and he's been invited to go to a Super Bowl party, and he feels nervous going to. His instinct is just not even go. Like, why?
Right.
I'm not going to fit in. I'm not going to know how to relate to these guys.
Anticipatory shame
He's
would inhibit a person from participating in a social event. Yeah. Yeah.
Because shame is all about disconnection. When we experience shame, we're in a shutdown state. I liken it to the freeze state. Or the dorsal vagal shutdown. So like I take the polyvagal theory and I map on the different self states to it. So I have a video I talk about that.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so when you enter into shame, it's preceded by the sympathetic nervous system activation. That's the double bind experience. So the nervousness is your sympathetic nervous system being activated until you get overwhelmed and you go into a shutdown, and that's shame. There's a disconnect within yourself because now you're feeling something, but you're not dealing with it. So there's a lack of cohesion there. And there's a disconnect between you and others, or at least a perceived disconnect.
A perceived disconnect, right. So can you explain what a double bind is for people?
So a double bind is just simply like a no-win situation. The main idea is that it's if an effective or legitimate self-state is one in which you're feeling and dealing, then a double bind is one in which where you believe if you deal with your feelings, you'll make things worse. And the feeling doesn't necessarily have to be a negative feeling. So say a lot of guys, we're culturated or we're socialized to not experience our emotions or not express our emotions. And the only acceptable emotion may be anger at times. So when say a guy feels glee or happiness, he may think, oh, but I can't express this because then I'll be shamed for acting gay, acting like a fairy. So even a positive feeling, they can get a sense that it's wrong to express a positive feeling. And then they go into a double bind experience. So it can happen with that, but primarily you're seeing them enter into a double bind with, they have a negative experience. So say maybe, here's an example that Nicolosi would use in the video that I watched where I first learned about this, because this self-state model is from Joseph Nicolosi Sr. He talks about it. If you want to really read more about it, you want to read Shame and Attachment Loss, his 2016 revised edition.
Hold that there just for a second, if you don't mind. So shame and attachment loss. Yeah. I'm just making it bigger for a second so folks can see that. And the it's backwards on my screen. What's it say?
Shame and attachment loss, the practical work of reparative therapy. So this was the founder of authentic reparative therapy, Joseph Nicolosi Sr. So what I do is reintegrative therapy, and that is developed by his son, Joseph Nicolosi Jr. So it's kind of the modern iteration of his father's work. It's more streamlined and more protocol based.
If you don't mind me jumping in here with an idea, I was explaining double bind to one of my kids the other day, kind of like you're supposed to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, but it doesn't count if you do it because you were told to. You see something like that.
Oh, that's a good point, because there's one of the things I train my clients. There's no virtue in not sinning because you were scared to do the sin. There's no virtue in doing something good out of fear or shame.
Right.
It's what I'm doing with our work is actually freeing clients so that they could either choose to embrace homosexuality or choose to live according to God's principles and standards. But they're now making that from a free place, not under compulsion.
Yeah.
So we're freeing them to make a decision that lines up with their values.
So this might derail what you're thinking. Maybe, I'm not sure. But by the way, I want to say thanks to Human Larva for the super chats here. He says, worth a super chat. Please have Andrew back on. And I'm seeing a lot of comments in here. Divine Dissident is saying this is so good. This is gold. A lot of good nuggets being shared. So I really appreciate you coming on. I can't reiterate that enough. So I want to ask this question. Double binds, shame. And so I'm going to float something by you. You tell me if I'm on base or off base. If somebody doesn't develop correctly, it seems like they would carry some pathologies of shame with them. What is the likelihood or tendency that they're going to then re-inflict, like hurt people? What is the tendency that they are going to re-inflict others around them with their own double binds to try to see, is that going to recapitulate itself and come back out of them where they start casting that shadow onto other people to control them and manipulate them?
Of course. I mean, that's essentially what a generational curse is. So
I don't know if you have any examples of how that would work.
And it doesn't always necessarily have to be homosexuality, but there's actually some, so we talked about, say, the father wound earlier. And this is well established in the research. It's just that the gay activists will say, well, the reason why so many gay men have poor relationships with their dads, or their dads were rejecting, was because their dad was rejecting them because of their homosexuality. As if, like, when they were little kids, the dad knew that he was going to be a gay man when he grew up, and he just hated him. And so it's well established in research that most men of same-sex attraction had poor relationships with their dads growing up. Now, this is for probably 3/4 of the type of guys we work with. All right, so there's other subtypes. All right, this is not universal for all guys with SSA. All right, just to make that clear. One of my colleagues at the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice, Sherry Golden, for her dissertation, her doctoral dissertation, she's like, well, we have all this research on the dads of these guys of same-sex attraction, but we don't have a lot of qualitative research on the dads themselves. Like, we know that these guys had these poor relationships, but what about the dads? We just assume that's because the dads recognized at an early age their son was going to be gay and they rejected them. But she decided to do a study where she interviewed the fathers of men with same-sex attraction. And what she found was the majority reported having a sense that they were not prepared to be dads, that they just didn't know what to do when they became a dad.
Not prepared to be a dad? Is that,
correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And so what you see is a guy who tends to, like...
Is anybody ready to be a dad?
Yeah, but if you think about it, like, so we see a lot of times, I got plenty of guys who I work with them where they have brothers, and their brothers were more stereotypically masculine, and the dad related to them well, but didn't know how to relate to them. And essentially what you're seeing there is a type of laziness on the dad's part, defaulting to what is easy. Oh, you know, Jim, he likes hunting and fishing like I do.
Yep.
We get along. Doesn't have to put much effort into that.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul, he likes art and reading.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let him be with mom. He's his mom's son. Literally, they get assigned to be the mom's kid or whatever. And so he just doesn't know how to relate to him. And it wasn't because he was rejecting. He didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about one of my clients I work with, who he grew up with this sense that his dad just hated him and just didn't like him.
Mm.
And now his dad is elderly, and he always viewed his dad as like this man's man. You know, he was a vet, and he was well liked by other guys. He was real macho. And now his dad is elderly, and he's aging, and he's dealing with a lot of health issues. So he's going with his dad to a doctor's appointment, and the doctor decides to do like a psych screening. And he asks all these questions like, how did you feel about yourself growing up? And he finds out all these insecurities that his dad had. That his dad never thought that he was masculine enough, that he was man enough, that he really was worthy of all the
So he's
accolades
projecting that insecurity onto his own son.
Yeah, and I was like, all these years you thought your dad didn't like you, but yet your dad actually was insecure about himself.
Yeah.
And he just didn't know how to connect with you.
Hmm.
So we see that that this perpetuates. It might not always be in same-sex attraction, but you're going to it's going to manifest in your relationships in one way or the other when you don't have that security in who you really are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what would it take? This might be too broad of a question, but what ideas would you have on how can we have a church without shame? Where, see, it seems like shame is a major culprit that perpetuates behaviors that people themselves don't even want, whether they're hetero or otherwise. So how could we have a church environment where it's not shameful and stigmatizing? Do you know of one anywhere, or you know what I mean? What ideas would you have about that?
I'm so blessed. Right now I'm in a church that, with all its flaws, I think they are doing a really good job. One of our elders, he had kind of been incognito for several months last year, and he got in front of the congregation. I was privy to some of this already, but he got in front of the congregation this Sunday, and he shared that the reason he had been around for a while last year was because he deals with alcohol addiction. And he had to go into rehab. And so he had voluntarily stepped down from being an elder for a period. And he was so, well, I guess he wasn't sure what the response would be. But that just sparked one person another coming up and like, you know what? I deal with addiction too. Another person that said, I overcame addiction. I'm so scared to share this. And people just started sharing. And then we, as a whole congregation, when we asked, that
almost brings tears to my eyes.
The pastor asked at the end, if you forgive this elder, would you be willing to stand up? And the whole congregation stands up. You know, it has to come from the top down. It has to be where there's no pretense in the church. And you practice what you want to see in the church. And you're willing to lay your stuff out there. I preach
practice what you want to see in a church. That's really good.
When I used to lead my group, I would tell the guys, I'll never ask you a question I'm not willing to answer myself. I don't have an essay background, but hey, I'll share, because first time doing that group I ran, the guys were scared to death to share anything. So I'd be the first one to share. At church, I'm pretty open book, as much as it can be. Safely. I've got to protect other people's stories that are intertwined with mine, but as much as I'm allowed, then I'm pretty open. And so I preach sometimes at my church, and like the last message I gave, I said, hey, I have sexual struggles. I have accountability in my life. You know, I try to make sure I have certain boundaries in place. And so I share that in front of a mixed group in the church. You've got to start from the top down and make it so that where there's shame, there's secrecy. And where there's secrecy, that gives the devil room to manipulate.
secrecy and dishonesty.
Yeah.
I have to distinguish for people sometimes the difference between secrecy and privacy, you know?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
my wife and I, we're married. We do a lot of things in private. It doesn't necessarily mean we're keeping a secret from anybody or being dishonest with anybody.
Yeah.
But when people start being...
Yeah, not everyone deserves to be privy to all your information. Like that's privileged information for a reason. So not everyone might be called to be as outspoken, but
right.
insofar as we can, so that it's a safer environment for those who are ready to share, that they can identify people that are safe to share. And I do think I'm happy to say my church does that pretty well, because I know my pastor hears a lot, but he has such a good pastor's heart. As much as I disagree with him on a lot of theology, I'm in a weird situation. Yeah, he leans very Calvinistic, and I am not a Calvinist. I'm almost as far away from Calvinist as you can be without being an open theist, you know. So I'm like. So I challenge him a lot, and he's like, we get into these discussions like, you really challenge me. I'm like, good. But despite that, he has such a good pastoral heart. And so people will share things with him, and he has no judgment. And so, because he has his own history of brokenness. We're all wounded healers. So when
it's a good book, by the way.
Yeah, when you get in touch with your own crap.
It's one of the books that identifies you as a pagan if you read it, I think. So what do you think about salience landscaping? You know, we talked about how a church environment might shame people and perpetuate some of these problems. What about salience landscaping? Like, I grew up in the independent Baptist realm, and they were constantly telling men and boys what not to look at, women how to dress, and getting on to men. Like, if they caught your eyes drifting down to, you know, scan a woman's body, something like that, they would call you on it and catch you on it and preach against it. And so this produced people. It seems to me that it puts all these issues right on the forefront, that foregrounds them in their salience landscape, so they can't even just go do normal things with normal people without this standing out to them everywhere. You get these people who are completely dysfunctional in public because they can't go to the mall to buy a new pair of shoes because they can't stop looking at the girls because they get, you know, because that's all they ever hear about at church. I mean, what do you think about that idea?
That's what we call the purity culture approach. So I have a video on that. The purity, I contrast that sort of purity culture approach.
You got a video on that, okay?
Yeah. I contrast that with what I call the sexual maturation and integration approach. And so when we just treat this as a sin issue, then you're gonna have these recommendations where you just gotta bounce your eyes, and you need to stay away from anything that might be a trigger of your lust. Yeah. And so even with, say, same-sex attraction, we get guys who will not go to a men's meeting or men's group or men's retreat because, well, I'll be triggered being around other guys. Like, well, how are you gonna get over that if you're avoiding it? Like, it's actually the opposite that heals you of it. It's getting the good connection with guys. Yeah. It's the longer you're perpetuating the shame, the sense that you're other, that you're different. It's the more you perpetuate that sense that it increases the desire for it in an erotic manner. But the more that legitimate need is being met, the less you desire and crave it in an erotic way. So we need to help people identify there's root wounds and needs and distortions that drive these the lust that we are trying to fight. In fact, like I say, just use the lustful thought, the concupiscence, the drive toward eroticization. Use that as your guide to what the underlying need really is. Focus on doing that.
I want to ask about that. So it's pretty clear about same-sex attraction. Maybe they lack some kind of masculinity from their developmental phase. Yeah. But what about, and this is an objection that I hear a lot. As a matter of fact, this came up on my channel recently with one of our guests. They're like, we're no different than same-sex attracted people because we want to do things. We have temptations to do things sexually that the Bible condemns also, and I can attest to that, having desires to do certain things that are outside the boundaries. Yeah. So what if I'm a guy and I'm feeling attraction that fulfilling the urge, the hypothalamic urge of that attraction would be, say, immoral or at least unwise, what is the underlying deficit? What am I lacking that's driving that?
So there could be a few things, but the main idea is, all right, so what's the standard? The standard is in integrated attraction. You are attracted to the opposite sex, but not to use the opposite sex as an object for your gratification. But you're motivated to bond with her.
So in being mode, not having mode. Charitably, not categorically.
That's the difference between love and lust. Love is about giving, lust is about taking. So lust is about using someone as an object and just treating them as an object. This is one of the other things that Pope John Paul II, back when he was Karol Wojtyła, talked about in his the book he wrote before he became Pope, Love and Responsibility. I did a whole series on this back in like January 2023. So I would highly recommend checking out that playlist.
Love and Responsibility. That's the playlist on your channel, on
Psycho
Bible channel.
There's a playlist called What is Love? And I'm doing commentary on that book. So JP2 came up with this norm he calls the personalistic norm. That a person is such an entity that the only good and proper response to them is love. That you view and what is love then? To harken back to like Aquinas, is to will the good of the other. So that is going back to the attachment stuff I was talking about earlier with the developmental model, is understanding that the other is good. Not just, and good in two ways, a good in and of herself and a good for me. So that I understand that I'm a good gift and she is a good gift. And so we want to enter into this mutual exchange of life-giving love. When a man is objectifying a woman, there's a few potential things he's doing. He's, one, not viewing her as a good gift, or that's a good in and of herself, but looking to her as an object for his own gratification. And so there needs to be a greater appreciation for her innate goodness. And he needs to get in touch with his own goodness as a gift, not his own goodness to keep indulging and feeding, but to give to her. So there's often wounds within his own sexuality or his own identity. It might not be at the gender identity level, but it could be at other forms of attachment. So, so say one of the approaches I work with guys with heterosexual sexual addiction issues, I'll teach them some mindful tips to use when they have an unwanted opposite sex attraction or lustful thought. I'll ask them, all right, first, so say you're lusting after this woman that you see in a pornography video. Okay. Ask yourself, if I were to encounter this woman in real life, how do you think she would think of you? And there might be a sense of inferiority that she would look down on him.
It's the S prime in Fowler's terms. Yeah.
And so if I can eroticize this, then it makes it more approachable. All right. That's essentially what a fetish is. A fetish is to take something that has associations of shame and fear, and then you eroticize it to make it those things that bring pain and shame and fear to make them feel good. So you're fetishizing that woman, essentially, because you're not looking at her as a whole person. You're fetishizing in parts of her appearance, or maybe just a certain body part. So because in true love, you're not just loving her body as if she's separate from her whole person. You're loving the whole person, which is the fact that we are body spirit composites. So there's your personality and your internal spirit and your body together. So that is what true integrated love is. It's to love the whole person, not just her body part or with the way she treats you. So there's something that you're looking for in that connection that is more some sort of use of the other. And that's something you've got to look out for. You can identify that when you have some sort of disordered attraction or lustful sort of habit.
So there's like a genuine relationality to it. I never heard this done before till just a couple of weeks ago. I heard Jordan Hall take the three transcendents, and he recently converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
And so he takes the three transcendents of good, true, and beautiful, and he's like, one of the problems in Christianity is we tend to start with what's true first. And he suggested that we start with what's beautiful first, and what's beautiful relates to relationality, and not beautiful in the sense of a lustful image, but beautiful in the sense of recognizing the wholeness and something that reveals more of a deepness about reality itself.
Yes.
When you see a connectedness and a wholeness and a togetherness, to recognize that beauty, something in being mode. So this other person is someone that I can be with. We can both be in a, not be together, but be together, instead of having each other in categorical ways like interchangeable parts on a car. Whereas that's more like just that categorical truth thing where we're making truth, makes distinctions. And so, there's a distinction I want to make. I can have you and I can fulfill this particular fetish that I have, rather than seeing the whole and integrated. And maybe when you fulfill that fetish, maybe you're destroying or harming part of the wholeness that is that other person. And why would you want to do that to them? It's like there's a soul behind those eyes. So sometimes if I find myself looking at somebody in an objectifying way, like a woman who's very attractive, I will imagine it's one of my guy friends dressed up in a woman suit to remind me that I'm dealing with a human who's there's a soul behind those eyes here.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. Oh man, I know I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I actually do have to wrap up soon. So what
if I ask you one more question?
Sure.
And then let you go. You talked about a debate between James White, and I honestly don't remember what the other person's name is.
It was Gregory Coles.
Yeah. Gregory Coles. What's your and they were debating I think the term gay Christian, something like that.
Correct. Is gay Christian a valid biblical identity?
Yeah. What's your takeaway from all that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, we'll have to do a whole other. If you want me, I could come back again, because there are these streams.
Well, it seemed like they were both wrong. Something like that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I'm not the biggest fan of James White, of course, but
right.
I agree with him in certain respects, and I also agreed with Greg Coles in certain respects, probably less than I did with James White. The problem is James would typically take more of the just as a sin-only approach. This is
right.
purely just
moralistic
sin issue.
Kind of shame. Yeah.
Whereas Gregory Coles and those that are in what we call side B gay Christianity will take more of this approach that homosexuality is just something that you are. And they have zero curiosity about how someone develops their same-sex attractions. So they basically adopt the entire world's framework for
it seems like there's both like a James White person or the woke mentality of the world. Neither one of them allows any curiosity about how this develops.
Correct. Yeah. And
James
still be like, well, it's sin. You need to repent of the sin of the lust. And it's like, there's lust and there's sin mixed in there, but if
you were really born again, you'd be a new creature and you wouldn't feel that.
How would you know till the end, though? Can't know if you're one of the really born again until the very end of your life. But anyway, so what you see is kind of these divisions now in the church regarding how we approach LGBT and homosexuality and same-sex attraction. And so the big kind of the lightning rod right now is side B, gay Christianity. Side A being fully affirming gay Christianity, like revisionist approach, where they just say, "Oh, God created us gay, and God is happy for us to be gay." And
banner waving progressive types.
Yeah. Whereas side B would say, "Well, we are gay. This is what we are," or they'll say same-sex attracted, but they're using same-sex attraction or same-sex attracted as like an identity category rather than just talking about their experience. And Gregory Coles, I think,
so they're egoic about it.
Exactly.
Make it part of their ego.
Definitely true. So they'll say that, well, we are gay, but we still agree with the historic sexual ethic of the church that marriage is only meant between a man and a woman. And so that leads them to a few options. So you see in side B, gay Christianity, just assuming that they should be celibate by default, just by virtue of them not having attraction to the opposite sex. And this is a wrong idea of what true celibacy is. So, because true celibacy is about sacrificing something that you do desire. You can't sacrifice a desire for marriage if you don't have a desire for marriage with a woman. So it's not true celibacy. It's simply just prolonged abstinence, which is fine if you want to be abstinent, but just like say you're celibate, that you're meant to be celibate because you have same-sex attraction, which is what Gregory Coles was saying, just it plateaus your own spiritual growth and transformation process. That's
a really good point. So make that distinction again, the distinction between celibacy and abstinence again in this regard?
So abstinence is simply just not sinning, not committing a sin. But celibacy is supposed to be a sacrifice of the good. So like in Catholicism, the vow of celibacy, whether it's as a priest or as a consecrated celibate, is supposed to be that you are sacrificing your desire, an actual desire you do have for marriage to the opposite sex. But you're laying aside so that you can enter into, in this life, at least symbolically, into the heavenly marriage. So if you look at like nuns, when they get confirmed or whatever, they go through their final process, it's almost like a wedding ceremony. So they're symbolically representing our future marriage as the bride of Christ. And so the priest represents God the Father. In this life, it's supposed to follow the symbols of marriage.
I understand.
But you can't actually surrender that if you don't actually have a felt desire for that. But what we see is a lot of these Protestants co-opting the Catholic tradition of celibacy to say, well, this is what we're meant for because we don't have a desire for marriage or this desire for sex with a woman. So this must mean that God is gifting us to be celibate. And so they just simply stop their own transformation and growth. They just, this is it. And they have no curiosity about what their attractions mean, what's underneath it, and what it may indicate about areas that God wants to bring healing. So they just stop. That's my greatest concern for them. So then what they see is, well, I still desire relationships. So then what you see happen is they enter into spiritual friendships. And what these are essentially sexless gay marriages, where some of them will even have like commitment ceremonies. Where
what do they call it?
They call it spiritual friendship.
Spiritual friendships.
So you'll get two guys who are going to enter into a covenantal friendship. They'll even have like a ceremony. Not all of them will, but some of them will have this ceremony. And they'll basically, they're being codependent with each other. And some of them may be so romantic that they'll enter into hugging and kissing with each other. But as long as they don't have sex, then they're okay. So stop short of sex. Now, some may just be best friends. But even if the one guy doesn't have same-sex attraction, he gets married to a woman, he has to tell that woman, by the way, I'm in a covenant relationship with this friend. He's going to go with me wherever I go, and he's going to live with us. And he's going to be in our lives always, perpetually. So they're accommodating basically their arrested development. So they're not doing greater work. Then what you see also...
plateauing, like you said. They're creating a plateau beyond which they cannot pass now.
Yep. And then the other thing you see within this side B gay Christianity is when a guy with same-sex attraction does marry a woman, they call it a mixed orientation marriage, because they believe that, well, he is gay, he's just in a marriage with a woman. And so it's mixed orientation.
That with the identity.
Correct. This is why you don't see me say, I don't use the term sexual orientation. All right, it's a false construct. The world lives in this sort of sexual orientation paradigm.
Oh no, I put that on the title of the video.
That's okay. That's fine. Don't worry about it, because then that gets views, that gets clicks. All right.
Well, no, I didn't realize this distinction. No, this is a good distinction. I just didn't realize it before.
The world's concept, which the side B just adopts unthinkingly, really, is that people are born with an orientation for who they will be sexually attracted to. And just as you grow up, you sort of discover it based on what you get aroused by, what you're attracted to. And so they're solidifying this concept of what they're attracted to so that it's a cop-out, so they don't have to do further work of exploration and healing. So that even if you do experience some sort of change or shift, is something Gregory Coles would say, oh, they're just experiencing their sexual orientation differently now. But still, they have this orientation. All right, they're just discovering new aspects to it. But the whole concept of sexual orientation is bogus. What you really have you have God's design for your sexuality. And God makes it plain and clear in the design of our bodies that men are made for women and women for man. It's as simple as that. We don't need to, when we make our feelings our basis for what we identify as, we run into all sorts of trouble. So,
you learn that you are not your feelings.
Exactly. Yeah. So instead, what we have are sexual arousal templates that we develop throughout our life. And what the world has done is take those sexual arousal templates and they've solidified them as orientations. But that's why it's not just gay, straight, or bi anymore. That's LGBTQ keeps proliferating because every little nuance or idiosyncrasy in your sexual arousal templates becomes justification for a new sexual orientation. To the point they even have a new one, what is it, abrosexual, where they come up with this new sexual orientation for those who experience change in their sexual orientation. So it's like, wait, this is what we've been saying all along. Y'all have been saying you're born gay, cannot change. And we're saying that change is possible. And now you're just taking that and you're calling it abrosexual. It's just another sexual orientation.
ABRO, abrosexuality?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I've always thought that plasticity, like neuroplasticity and probably some other kinds of plasticity exists in the human. In other words, we are impressionable. There's a lot of different influencing factors that can affect what we find attractive, what we're attracted to, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So the work I'm doing is helping people with the actual sexual arousal templates and to actually help them experience change in those. So people say, oh, you're changing their orientation. I'm like, well, I don't believe in orientation. I don't use gay or straight. I'm not doing conversion therapy because I'm not changing someone from something from one thing to another. What we're doing in my therapy is actually help people discover the truth of who they already are. That once you identify the reality, I'm a man and man is made for woman. All this other stuff is lies that I've been believing about myself based on my sexual arousal templates.
That's a very profound distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that's as a note I can end on.
Yeah, I know you got to go. I still want to, I wanted to click on plasticity a little bit. I also wanted to ask, when earlier in the discussion, you said, if people do the work, I hear that phrase, do the work, a lot. And I'm always curious, like, what exactly is the work? And maybe we can offload that for another discussion.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to be back on, for sure.
Answer it in 30 seconds. Yeah. Yeah. Based on the comments that I'm seeing, I'm pretty sure that everyone would like to see you again. So let me say before we go, Psycho Bible, make sure you go to his channel and subscribe. Lots of really great content at Psycho Bible. Go over there and subscribe to his channel as soon as you can.
Yep. I'll plug one last thing real quick because I saw one of the comments was asking if there's quantitative research on what I do. And there is. If you go to reintegrativetherapy.org, or is it .com? Anyway, look up Reintegrative Therapy Association. There was a longitudinal study done of clients who did reintegrative therapy, and we saw that one, well-being increase, and so they not only felt better, even if their attractions didn't change, but they increased in their well-being, and they experienced change in their sexual attraction thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and identity in statistically and clinically significant levels. So there actually is and this is the only prospective study that was ever done on this. We
measured by standard deviations, all that. Yeah.
Yep. We got a lot of retrospective studies and anecdotal studies out there that have both negative and positive, for and against type of therapies. But this is the only study that was done. It was published in 2021 by Carolyn Pila and Phil Sutton. So you can find the research out there. I did an interview with the author of the study on my channel, so you can dive into that as well.
Andrew, this has been one of the most informative conversations I've had in a long time. So
that's awesome.
I can't thank you enough, and I hope that you do come back on at some point and continue having this discussion. This has been, I feel like I've learned a lot. I had a lot of streams of thought in my head that I feel like are better, way better informed now than they were before. So I don't know what I thought I expected, but this is a lot better than it. And so, yeah, so thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on. One last time, go to Psycho Bible, and subscribe to Andrew's channel and listen to him.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
God All right, Andrew. God bless you. We'll see you soon. And everyone else watching the channel, you can support us at the beyondthefundamentals.com on the donate page. Thanks for those who do that. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.
Once again, Kevin, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the channel. I know you took a bit of a risk. I've had some people who had interviewed me in the past, but they pulled the interview later, or they never aired it because they just got scared. Paul Vanderklay. I've had some people who did our interview and it was well received at first, but they're scared of being canceled, so then they set it to private and or to unlisted, so you can only go to the interview if you have the link already. And so it takes a lot of courage for someone to interview me, and so I really appreciate your willingness and openness to doing that. I get a lot of heat for the work I do, and so to have the opportunity to disseminate to the larger church and other Christians the truth about what we do is a great opportunity. And I had a lot of other questions that we wanted to get to, and I hope we have another interview to do all that. But you had some really great questions. Even though we went down rabbit trails, it was all good. It was fun. It showed me that you were really tracking with me, and you had great corollaries, great follow-ups. So to everyone who became a subscriber because of this interview, thank you so much. I gained a lot of subscribers from this interview, but I just want to let you know I have over 200 videos on my channel at this time. I am under threat though, so be sure to subscribe to me on the alternative platforms like Rumble or Odyssey, even though Odyssey doesn't have my videos that are longer than an hour. But also, it can be overwhelming looking at all my content, so in each of my videos, be sure to check the description. If there are any other videos that are relevant to the topic in that video, or the topics that come up in that video, I provide links to them in that video. So you can go down the rabbit hole that way and just have at it. So to everyone watching, I just hope this was helpful, and please be blessed. And if you are, if it sparked anything within you, drop a comment, share, subscribe, and please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully.